Mark Antonacci is a lawyer here in town, also a Shroud of Turin expert. Mark, you said last hour that you have last segment, you have a test to prove whether or not this shroud is or is not the actual shroud that Jesus wore when he was taken down off the cross. Pretty extraordinary. Pretty extraordinary to think that the body disappeared in a burst of radiation. What was your reaction when you made this presentation at this conference?
That wasn't the first time I came to that conclusion, but I mean, my reaction is...
No, what was their reaction? How was this being received by the experts in the community?
Many of those experts, I had called, in my book, I wrote a book in 2000 called The Resurrection of the Shroud. And I called for these same tests at that time in that book. Mm-hmm. And I gave the same hypothesis of how the radiation was occurred on the shroud and how this same event would cause the unique body images to appear on the cloth as well. So many of the people in that audience were aware of my 2000 book and had read it.
Okay. What are the possibilities of somebody running this test? Who owns the shred? The Catholic Church own it?
Yeah, the Vatican owns it.
Yeah. How close are we to them actually agreeing to allow you to do this?
Everything's up in the air right now as far as who's going to even be Pope.
Well, no, I understand that, but in years past, when you've made this request, have you gotten past the front door?
No.
Right.
I have not.
What about some of the other experts, some of the scientists? Have any scientists come to you and sort of defended your notion?
Oh, sure. We have some of the finest scientists in the world that are doing research just in this regard that were with me at the conference, right, and that also gave papers. I mean, they're doing studies and have presented papers at the same conference that shows that if you irradiate linen, which is what the shroud is, it's a linen cloth, if you irradiate it with neutrons, it will not only create carbon-14 isotopes within the linen, these atoms or isotopes are not removed when you pre-treat and clean it prior to radiocarbon dating. Normally, if you add carbon-14 to an object that you're dating, that won't screw up your date results because you can pre-treat and clean it and rinse that stuff off with various acids and bases. However, with radiation, these additional carbon-14 atoms are within the molecular structures of the linen, and they're not removed when you pre-treat and clean it.
But so your point is they're getting skewed data on this carbon dating because of this. Your hypothesis is from this radiation.
Yes.
And where did this radiation come from? There's really only one reason.
There's really only one logical source.
Right. It's kind of George Norrie-esque. You would agree, right? I mean, you're kind of out there.
If it wasn't for the fact that all the other evidence in this cloth is also consistent with every element of the passion, crucifixion, death, burial, and as well as the resurrection of the historical Jesus Christ, as these accounts were written in what are the most attested sources of antiquity. Were it not for that, I would agree with you.
Let's say it's determined that the shroud is from that time.
Yes.
Still doesn't prove that it was his and he was wrapped in it, does it?
You would have a man who was crucified, who incurred all the tortures that Christ did in the same time, in the same location.
Couldn't have been the other two on each side of him? They could have been wrapped in this.
No, there's no historical source that says either the two prisoners were also buried. In fact, the same source that mentions the two prisoners says that Jesus was buried in a linen shroud.
Right.
And these other two prisoners, They weren't crowned with thorns. They weren't stabbed in the side. They don't have pre-mortem and post-mortem blood on the cloth or on their bodies.
Right.
And they didn't have any of the. They weren't scourged. The man has 130 scourge marks on him.
Do you want it to be true, or are you coming at this purely through scientific? I'd like to know. Do you think it is?
I think it is.
Do you think it is because of your science background, your law background, or your religious background, wanting it to be so it has clouded your judgment in other ways?
It's my law background. As an attorney, if you have thousands of items of evidence for one particular conclusion, and you have one aberrant result for another conclusion, and that one is controversial, and you can test that.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to give a conclusion right now, I would say that is the burial garment of Jesus, and that the events that were described to have occurred to him, say from Good Friday through Sunday morning, I would say those events did occur to him. And in fact, this miraculous encoding event captures all the other events. It's like it took two photographs of the man, the frontal and dorsal photographs, that captures all this evidence.
Mark Antonacci, our guest, Shroud of Turin expert, St. Louisan, who wants the Vatican to allow him to radioisotope test this. What's the official terminology here? Just test it for radiation, I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay. Last question for you, Mark. Why do we care? Is it? Do you want to prove that Jesus died on the cross? What will humanity learn or know by proving this to be true or not true?
If you give me a few minutes to try to answer that.
Make it interesting.
Okay. There's the obvious eternal benefit. I mean, this same guy...
But there are people who believe regardless of what it says. And
yes.
There are people who won't believe regardless of what it says.
But there's people who, if these tests find the results that were hypothesized,
mm-hmm.
there's many people who would realize the same conclusion. Yes, this man was Jesus, and he matches all the circumstances in time, place, location,
mm-hmm.
And that he was crucified, he suffered, he was buried, he was dead.
But there are people who already know that
and he resurrected. Well, I'll be honest with you. I was an agnostic. I didn't think that before.
I understand that, but
there would also be another benefit too, besides the eternal benefit. But which I want to get back to. But
sure.
On the eternal side of it, if you realize that these events happened, and that it could be a formula for you, this guy comes back to life. If this is a formula or a means for you to have life after death, you'd look at that because sooner or later you're going to die.
Right.
The one absolute
sure.
of your existence is you're going to die.
Right.
And so this issue is relevant to you.
Are you agnostic still?
No.
Are you Catholic now?
I'm Protestant.
You're Protestant. Okay,
yeah.
So you're Christian then. In other
yes.
words. But again, very similar to politics. It's a question without an answer. No matter how much you show somebody, look, this man lived, this man is this, all of these things. People who want to believe are going to believe, and people who don't want to believe are not going to believe. Just because this man, according to you, disappeared in a burst of radiation, doesn't mean he's the Son of Man. And if they don't believe it, there still doesn't matter what evidence you prove to them.
Okay. Most people probably know. They've heard of the Shroud of Turin. They've heard of its radiocarbon date. They're probably not aware of the thousands of other pieces of evidence that are consistent with its authenticity and that are consistent with the passion, crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection. I think you ought to look at the result after people have had a chance to look at that. You don't know what you would think until you've looked at all the evidence.
True, yeah.
And I plan to put it out in a book if I can obtain all this evidence.
But it seems to me like it's a long shot for the Vatican to allow you to do this test.
I think it's a matter of time when it will be done because they have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Right now, if you did these tests and you're not able to show that it was irradiated with particle radiation, you're in the same situation you are right now. The shroud is mysterious, and it could be Jesus' burial cloth. It could not be. But if it's irradiated with particles, a miraculous event had to happen to that guy.
That is Mark Antonacci, a lawyer here in town, also a Shroud of Turin expert. Interesting stuff, Mark. Good luck.
But there's other benefits to it as well.
Which is?
How much time I got?
No, you're out of time.
Okay.
Come back another time. Stay tuned for the stunning conclusion. You bring me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West, and I'll give you more time. How about that?
I won't bring it.
All right, there you go. 9:30. We'll come back here. Mark, thanks for your time. Interesting stuff. Back in a moment on the Big 550 KTRS.